Ethan rode slowly through the hot canyon trail, his horse's hooves stirring up little clouds of dust with every step. The sun was lowering toward the west, throwing long shadows across the rocks. He had been driving cattle for weeks and was finally making his way back toward town, hoping for a hot meal and maybe a bed with clean sheets. His shirt was dusty, his hat stained with sweat, and his face showed the weariness of a man who had seen many hard days on the trail. He was used to loneliness and used to silence, but on this particular evening, the air around him felt heavier than usual, as if something was waiting for him just beyond the bend of the canyon. As his horse clopped along the narrow trail, Ethan noticed movement near a cluster of rocks by the stream bed. He slowed, leaning forward in his saddle. At first he thought it might be a deer or some wild animal searching for water, but as he squinted he saw the outline of a person lying still, half in shadow. Caution told him to keep riding. Encounters in these parts could be dangerous, especially if one stumbled upon someone from a tribe that might not take kindly to cowboys passing through their land. Yet something tugged at his conscience, refusing to let him leave. He dismounted, tying his horse to a scrubby bush, and walked closer. When he got near enough, Ethan saw clearly. A woman, dressed in Apache clothing, her face pale with exhaustion. One arm clutched her side as if she had been hurt. Her lips were dry, her breathing shallow. She blinked at him, startled but too weak to move. Ethan knelt beside her, his instincts sharp but his manner gentle. "You're hurt," he said softly, though he wasn't sure she understood his words. Carefully, he took his canteen and tilted it toward her. She hesitated for a moment, but thirst overcame her doubt and she drank greedily until she coughed. Ethan let her sip slowly, giving her time. Her eyes followed him with suspicion, but also with confusion. Cowboys and Apache did not usually cross paths in peace. Ethan knew that. He could have walked away and no one would have blamed him. But he couldn't leave a person to die out here. He searched through his saddlebag, pulling out an old cloth and tearing it into strips. Her side was bleeding where a sharp rock must have cut her when she fell. Gently, Ethan pressed the cloth against the wound, tying it as best as he could. She flinched at first, but then relaxed when she realized he meant no harm. The woman spoke something in her own tongue, words Ethan couldn't fully grasp. But the tone was clear. She was asking why. Why would a stranger stop to help her? Ethan simply shrugged, meeting her eyes with quiet honesty. "Because you needed it," he said, even though he knew she might not understand. The sun sank lower and the air grew cooler in the canyon. Ethan built a small fire near the stream bed, careful to keep it low so it would not draw unwanted attention. He gave her a piece of dried meat from his supplies and watched her struggle to chew it, but she accepted it gratefully. He offered his blanket, though the chill of evening would leave him shivering without it. She pulled it around her shoulders, her gaze still fixed on him, studying him as though trying to see into his soul. Ethan sat a few feet away, leaning back against a rock, pretending not to notice how closely she watched him. He did not want her to feel afraid, but he also wanted her to see that he wasn't going anywhere until she was strong enough to sit up on her own. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of fire and the faint sound of nightbirds in the distance. Ethan thought about all the stories he had heard, the distrust, the conflicts, the endless fights between settlers and tribes. Yet here he was, sitting in the desert night, sharing food and fire with a woman he had every reason to avoid. Life had a strange way of putting people together when least expected. As the stars began to shine overhead, Ethan shifted his hat over his eyes, trying to rest. But he kept one ear alert, listening for trouble. If her people found them, would they see him as a friend or as a threat? He couldn't know. Still, he refused to regret his choice. Leaving her alone would have haunted him more than any risk he now faced. The woman, weak though she was, spoke again in broken English this time. "Why, help me," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, but the question carried weight. Ethan opened his eyes and looked at her. He considered giving a long answer, but instead kept it simple the way he always did. "Because you're a person, and you needed someone." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, as though she understood enough. Her body relaxed, her head leaning back against the stone and her eyes drifted shut. Ethan kept watch until he too drifted into a light sleep. In the middle of the night he stirred and saw her still wrapped in the blanket, her breathing steadier now. He allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief. He did not know her name or her story, or whether they would cross paths again after tonight. But for now she was safe, and that was enough. By the time dawn painted the canyon walls with soft light, the woman stirred again. She seemed stronger than before, her eyes clearer, though she still moved with caution. She handed him back the blanket, her lips forming words in her own tongue that Ethan could not understand. But the tone was unmistakable. Gratitude. He nodded, tipping his hat slightly. He gave her the last of his water, then pointed toward the path that led back to the higher trails. She looked at him one last time, holding his gaze with quiet intensity, as though memorizing the face of the cowboy who had stopped when others would have passed. Ethan mounted his horse once more. He did not ask her to follow, and she did not ask him to stay. They were from different worlds, and both of them knew it. But as he rode away, he couldn't shake the image of her eyes, fierce even in weakness, and the strange pull he felt in his chest. He pushed it aside. He was a drifter, always moving, always alone. And yet, as the canyon faded behind him, Ethan carried with him the memory of that night, of kindness shared across silence, of trust given in the simplest of moments. He believed that was the end of it. He believed he would never see her again. But fate, as always, had a way of surprising even the most solitary cowboy. The town of Red Creek was small, but to a man like Ethan, who had spent weeks under the open sky, it felt almost like a city. Wooden buildings lined the main street: saloon, general store, blacksmith, and a small corral where horses were traded. The air smelled of dust and smoke, mixed with the sharper scent of leather and horses. It was a place where travelers came and went, where miners bought supplies before heading into the hills, and where cowboys like Ethan could trade cattle earnings for food, drink, and a little rest. Ethan led his tired horse toward the corral, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He needed grain for the animal and a few supplies for himself: coffee, beans, maybe a bar of soap. After days on the trail, even small comforts felt like luxuries. He kept his hat low over his eyes, not wanting attention. He was a man used to silence and shadows, never staying too long anywhere. The less people noticed him, the easier life seemed. As he was paying the stable boy, Ethan felt a strange prickle at the back of his neck, the kind a man got when someone was watching. He looked around slowly, his eyes scanning the street. At first, all seemed ordinary: merchants sweeping doorways, a pair of miners arguing, a wagon rolling past with sacks of flour. But then he noticed a figure standing near the edge of the corral fence, half hidden in shadow. It was a woman, her dark braids hanging over her shoulders, her eyes fixed directly on him. Ethan's hand stilled on the coins he was about to hand over. His heart gave a quiet jolt. He knew that face. He had seen it in the canyon, pale with exhaustion and framed by the glow of his small fire. It was the Apache woman he had helped. She looked stronger now, her skin holding more color, her step steady, yet the intensity in her gaze had not changed. She was still studying him, as if searching for something only she could see. Ethan turned fully to face her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The bustle of the town carried on around them, but it felt as if a silence hung between just the two of them. Finally, she stepped closer, her movements graceful and certain. "You," she said quietly, her English careful but clear. "The cowboy." He tipped his hat slightly, unsure what else to do. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said. Her eyes softened slightly, though her expression remained serious. "I am Nahila," she said, placing a hand lightly against her chest. The name carried weight, spoken with quiet pride. Ethan nodded. "Ethan," he replied simply. Nahila studied him for a moment, then said, "You gave water. You gave life, my people. We do not forget." Ethan shifted uneasily. He was not a man who liked being called a hero. "Anybody would have done the same," he muttered. She tilted her head as if she found his answer amusing. "No," she said firmly. "Not anybody. Many would leave. You did not." Ethan had no reply to that. He rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable with the way she spoke, as though his small act of kindness carried far more meaning than he ever intended. He wanted to say he was just a drifter, that he didn't deserve any thanks, but Nahila's eyes silenced him. They were eyes that had seen pain and survival, eyes that carried the strength of someone who had endured much and yet still stood tall. After a pause, she stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "In my people's ways," she said, "when one life saves another, a bond is made. It is not broken." Ethan frowned slightly. A bond? She nodded slowly. Yes, you tied yourself to me with your mercy, and I must honor it. Ethan tried to laugh lightly, though it came out more awkward than amused. I wasn't tying myself to anything. I just couldn't leave you there. Nahila did not smile. She simply studied him, as though she was looking through his words into something deeper. You will understand, she said calmly, her tone carrying certainty. In time you will see. Before Ethan could answer, she turned and walked away, blending into the crowd until he could no longer see her. He stood there for a moment, his horse shifting restlessly at his side, wondering what kind of trouble he had just walked into. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself it was nothing. She was grateful, that was all. Nothing more would come of it. Or so he thought. That evening, Ethan sat in the saloon with a plate of stew and a mug of coffee. The place was lively, filled with laughter, shouts, and the clink of glasses. A fiddle player struck up a tune in the corner, while men argued over cards. Ethan sat alone at a corner table, as he always did, eating quietly, his eyes watchful. He wasn't looking for company, but company, it seemed, was looking for him. The door opened, and in walked Nahila once again. The saloon grew quieter as men noticed her presence. An Apache woman in town was not a common sight, and it drew more than a few stares. But Nahila ignored them all. Her gaze went straight to Ethan, as if no one else existed in the room. She crossed the floor with calm steps, her dignity unshaken by the eyes that followed her. When she reached his table, she stood tall, her voice carrying clearly. I told you, she said, our ways are not like yours. You saved me. You carry a bond now. Ethan set down his mug, uneasy at the attention they were drawing. Sit down, he muttered, hoping to quiet the whispers spreading through the saloon. She did not sit. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, lowering her tone. You may not want thanks, but my people will not allow debt. You will be repaid, one way or another. Ethan looked at her, trying to find the right words. He wanted to tell her she owed him nothing, that he wanted no part of whatever she meant. But as he met her eyes, steady and certain, he realized she would not accept such an answer. She had the look of someone who had already decided something, and nothing he said could turn her away. Finally, Ethan sighed. I don't need anything, he said quietly. I'm just a cowboy passing through. Nahila's expression softened slightly. No, she said again, her voice steady. You are more. With that, she straightened, gave him a final nod, and left as quickly as she had entered. The saloon slowly filled again with noise, but Ethan sat in silence, staring at his half-finished stew. He felt as if a storm was building on the horizon, one he couldn't see clearly yet, but one that was coming for him whether he wanted it or not. That night, as he lay on the narrow bed of the boarding house, Ethan could not sleep. He replayed the moments in his mind, the canyon, the firelight, the way Nahila had looked at him. A bond, she had said, a tie that could not be broken. He told himself it was just words, just a custom he didn't understand. But deep inside, he knew this was not the last time he would see her. Fate had begun weaving their paths together, and Ethan, no matter how much he wanted to remain a drifter, was already caught in the threads. Ethan woke the next morning with the sense that someone might be following him. He was no stranger to the feeling. A man who lived on the trail learned to trust instincts. Still, when he walked down the wooden steps of the boarding house and stepped into the early light of Red Creek Street, everything seemed ordinary. Merchants were setting up shop, wagons rattled past, and a dog barked at a passing rider. Yet in the back of his mind, Ethan felt the same quiet prickle he had felt at the corral. He bought a few supplies at the general store, coffee beans, dried jerky, and cartridges for his revolver. As he was leaving, he noticed movement in the distance near the line of cottonwood trees just beyond town. A figure stood there watching. It was Nahila again. She gave a small gesture, beckoning him toward the trees. Ethan hesitated. He told himself to ignore it, to keep walking, but his boots seemed to turn on their own, carrying him down the dirt road toward her. When he reached the shade of the cottonwoods, Nahila stood waiting, calm and composed as if she had been certain he would come. Beside her was another figure, a young woman with long black hair braided neatly down her back. Her eyes were bright, sharp with curiosity, and her posture straight, carrying both pride and a quiet shyness. She was dressed in traditional Apache clothing, simple yet beautiful, the patterns of beads catching the morning light. Nahala spoke first. "This is my daughter, Ayoka." Her voice carried a tone of ceremony as though the introduction itself meant something more than just words. Ethan tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am," he said, then nodded at the young woman. Miss Ayoka's eyes studied him openly without fear. She did not speak right away, but there was a spark of something in her gaze. Curiosity, perhaps, or judgment. Ethan felt suddenly aware of the dust on his boots, the worn edges of his hat, the roughness of his appearance. He was a man who slept under the stars more than in beds, a man with little to his name besides his horse and the tools on his belt. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. Nahala stepped forward, her expression firm. "Ethan," she said, "you saved my life. Our ways say a bond was made. That bond is not small. It ties families together." Ethan frowned slightly, glancing between mother and daughter. "I told you before," he said gently. "You don't owe me anything." Nahala shook her head. "You do not understand. Debt is not the word. Honor is the word. You gave life, and life must answer. I offer you something greater than thanks." She gestured toward Ayoka, who stood quietly, her chin lifted with quiet dignity. "My daughter." The word struck Ethan harder than a bullet. He blinked, certain he had misheard. "Your daughter?" he repeated slowly. Nahala nodded. "Yes, you showed mercy when others would turn away. A man who saves is worthy of a woman who will stand with him. My daughter is strong. She is wise. She will walk with you if you accept." Ethan's mouth went dry. He shifted his weight, glancing at Ayoka, who still watched him steadily, though a faint flush had risen in her cheeks. He could not read her thoughts, whether she approved of her mother's offer or resented it. All he knew was that the ground beneath him suddenly felt unsteady. "Ma'am," Ethan said carefully, his voice low. "I didn't come here looking for a wife. I'm a drifter. I ride from one job to the next. I'm not the kind of man to be tied down. I wouldn't want to dishonor your daughter by agreeing to something I can't promise." Nahala listened without interrupting. When he finished, she spoke calmly but with firmness. "A man's path can change. Sometimes he does not see the road ahead until it opens before him. You are not a man of empty heart. I saw your truth when you gave me water, when you gave me fire. My daughter deserves a man who carries that kind of heart." Ethan felt heat rising in his chest, a mix of discomfort and something he couldn't quite name. He turned slightly toward Ayoka, hoping for some sign from her. At last she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "You do not have to answer now," she said. Her English was clear, though touched with the melody of her people's tongue. "My mother believes in bonds. I believe in watching a man's steps. I will see what kind of man you are. Then I will know if her words are true." Her calmness struck Ethan more than her mother's insistence. There was no desperation in her tone, no rush, only quiet certainty. She did not look like a girl being given away. She looked like a woman measuring him with her own judgment. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Fair enough," he said. "I'm not promising anything, but I won't run from the chance to prove myself. That's all I can say." Nahala gave a small nod, satisfaction flickering in her eyes. "That is enough. You will come with us. You will see our ways and we will see you." Ethan hesitated again. He knew walking into an Apache camp was no small matter. Many cowboys would call it madness, risking his life among people who had every reason to distrust men like him. But something inside told him this was not a trap. It was a test, perhaps, or a path he had not expected. He looked once more at Ayoka. Her steady gaze gave him an odd sense of calm, though he could not explain why. "All right," he said finally. "I'll come." The journey into the hills was quiet but filled with tension. Ethan rode beside Nahala and Ayoka, the trees closing in around them as they left the open plains behind. The land grew wilder, the air cooler. He felt every eye upon him even when he saw no one. The Apache moved like shadows through their land, unseen but always present. Ethan kept his hands away from his revolver, making no sudden moves, showing respect in every gesture. When they reached the camp, a cluster of lodges stood in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. Children paused in their play to stare. Women looked up from their tasks and men straightened with guarded expressions. Whispers moved quickly. An outsider had entered their ground, and not just any outsider, but a cowboy. Ethan felt the weight of every glance, the suspicion in every eye. Nahala led him forward without hesitation. "This man saved me," she declared in her own tongue, her voice carrying authority. He is under my protection." The people listened, but their expressions remained wary. Ethan knew trust was not given easily here. He could sense the challenge in their eyes. To them, he was not a hero. He was a stranger who had yet to prove he deserved to stand among them. As the sun dipped low, Ethan sat by a fire at the edge of the camp. Ahyoka came to sit across from him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You look uneasy," she said quietly. He gave a faint smile. "Wouldn't you be? Feels like half your people are waiting for me to trip." She tilted her head, considering him. "They wait to see truth. Words are nothing. Only steps show who a man is." Ethan nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll just have to let my steps do the talking." Ahyoka's lips curved in the faintest hint of a smile, though it was gone quickly. She studied him again, then said softly, "We will see." Ethan leaned back against the log, staring into the fire. He had come to Red Creek for supplies and rest, nothing more. Yet here he was, sitting in an Apache camp with a woman's eyes measuring every word and every move. He did not know where the road was leading, but he felt in his bones that his life had just shifted in a way he could not turn back from. Life in the Apache camp was different from anything Ethan had known. He was a cowboy used to open trails, saloons, and long nights under the stars with only his horse for company. Here he was surrounded by families, by voices speaking in a tongue not his own, by customs and ways he had only ever seen from a distance. At first he felt like a shadow walking among them. Watched closely, never trusted, always on the edge of belonging, but not quite inside. The men especially looked at him with narrowed eyes. To them, he was a stranger who had no place among their lodges. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, whispering about the tall outsider with dusty boots and a wide-brimmed hat. Ethan kept his head down, speaking little, trying to show through actions that he meant no harm. He remembered Ahyoka's words. Words mean nothing, steps show truth. So he set about showing his steps. When the women carried heavy water jars from the stream, Ethan stepped in to lift them, carrying the weight with ease. When fences near the horse corral broke, he mended them with the steady hands of a man who had worked wood and rope all his life. When hunters returned with game, he helped clean and carry the meat without being asked. At first they watched with suspicion, waiting to see if he would fail, but slowly their eyes softened. Ahyoka often watched him, though not always directly. She moved gracefully about the camp, tending to tasks, speaking with the other women, her braids swinging as she worked. Ethan felt her gaze at times like a warmth on his back. She never praised him openly, but there were small signs, an approving glance, a softer tone when she spoke that told him she noticed his efforts. One afternoon, Ethan was walking back from the stream when a group of boys ran past him, shouting and laughing. They chased each other near the edge of the creek, where the water had swollen from recent rain. The banks were slippery, and Ethan's heart quickened as he saw one boy slip and tumble dangerously close to the rushing current. Without a thought, Ethan dropped his supplies and sprinted forward. He lunged, catching the boy's arm just as the child slid toward the water. Pulling with all his strength, he dragged the boy back to solid ground. The boy stared up at him wide-eyed, too shocked to speak. Soon the other children rushed over, their voices high with alarm, and one of the mothers came running. She pulled her son into her arms, her eyes brimming with both fear and relief. She looked at Ethan, words failing her, but the gratitude in her gaze spoke louder than anything. For the first time, Ethan saw the camp looking at him differently, not as a stranger, but as a man who had saved one of their own. That evening, the campfire seemed warmer, the air lighter. People who had once turned away now nodded at him, small gestures of respect. Ethan said nothing, but inside he felt the weight of suspicion lifting piece by piece. Later, as the fire burned low, Ahyoka approached him. Her eyes reflected the flames, steady and thoughtful. "You risked yourself today," she said softly. Ethan shrugged, his voice calm. Any man would have done the same. "No," Ahyoka said, her tone firm but gentle. "Not any man. You did not think of danger. You thought only of the boy." Ethan looked at her, the corner of his mouth tugging into a faint smile. "Guess I've got a habit of not walking away when someone needs help." Ahyoka studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You are not what I thought when I first saw you." "And what did you think?" he asked. "That you were like the others," she admitted. "Men who ride through and see only enemies, not people. But you are not the same." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest at her words, though he tried not to show it. Maybe I'm just tired of being alone, he said quietly. Ayoka tilted her head, her expression softening. Alone is heavy. Even the strongest man cannot carry it forever. The silence between them was filled with unspoken things neither dared to say yet. Ethan looked away, focusing on the fire, though his heart beat faster. In the days that followed, Ethan grew more at ease in the camp. He learned to listen to their stories, to respect their traditions. He watched how they honored the land, how every part of a hunt was used, nothing wasted. He realized how little he had truly understood about their lives, and he felt a quiet respect growing within him. One afternoon, a storm rolled over the hills, sudden and fierce. The wind tore at the lodges and rain hammered the earth until rivers of mud ran through the camp. Children cried, and women struggled to keep their fires from drowning. Ethan leaped into action, helping secure the lodges, using his strength to hold ropes against the howling wind. When a small shelter threatened to collapse, he braced it with his shoulders until others could tie it down. He worked until his muscles burned, until his clothes were soaked through, but he did not stop until every shelter stood firm. When the storm finally passed, the camp was safe. Exhausted, Ethan sank to the ground, rain dripping from his hat brim. Around him, people murmured their thanks. For the first time, Ethan felt truly accepted, not just tolerated, but trusted. That night, as the stars broke through the clearing sky, Ayoka came to sit beside him. She handed him a piece of warm bread, baked fresh after the storm. He accepted it with quiet gratitude. They sat in silence for a while, the night calm after the chaos of the storm. At last, Ayoka spoke. "You have shown your steps," she said softly. "My mother was right. You carry honor." Ethan turned to look at her, his voice low. "And what do you think, Ayoka? Do you believe I'm the man your mother says I am?" Ayoka's eyes held his unflinching. "I believe you are a man who does not run from burden, a man who gives without asking. That is enough for me to see." For a moment, the world seemed to fall quiet around them. Ethan felt the pull of her words deep in his chest, a warmth that reached further than he wanted to admit. He had come here by chance, by a single act of kindness in a canyon, and yet sitting here now he realized that something had changed inside him. The drifter who had once ridden alone was beginning to feel the weight of belonging, and for the first time he did not mind. The firelight flickered between them, casting soft shadows. Ethan knew the journey was not over, that trials still lay ahead. But as he met Ayoka's steady gaze, he felt a quiet certainty he had not known before. Whatever path lay before him, he no longer walked it alone. The morning air in the Apache camp was crisp and quiet, a gentle calm after the bustle of the past days. Birds called softly from the trees, and the sun painted the lodge roofs with gold. Ethan sat by the fire, watching the embers glow, thinking about everything that had happened since he first stumbled upon Nahila in the canyon. He had never expected to find himself here, in a camp full of people who had once been strangers, who had now become witnesses to his life. Nahila approached him, her steps slow but confident. Her eyes held a mixture of warmth and authority. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm, "you have shown the heart of a man. You have walked among us, faced our ways, and proved your truth. You carry honor, and that is not small." Ethan looked at her, unsure what she meant. He had done what he could, yes, but he had not thought much about honor. He had only acted as he always had, guided by instinct, by what he felt was right in the moment. Yet her words struck him, carrying weight he could not ignore. Nahila gestured toward Ayoka, who stood a short distance away, her eyes quiet but bright with emotion. "Now, Ethan," she continued, "it is time to honor the bond we spoke of. My daughter is strong, wise, and brave. You have seen her courage, and she has seen yours. It is her choice as well as mine to offer her hand to you." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had imagined many things, many possibilities of where this path might lead, but he had never expected to hear such words so plainly spoken. He looked at Ayoka, searching her face for any sign of doubt or hesitation. She met his gaze steadily, a faint, serene smile brushing her lips. "I have watched you, Ethan," she said softly, stepping closer. "You did not seek favor. You did not ask for reward. You gave freely when giving was difficult. That is the measure of a man. If you wish, you may walk with me now, and together we will find the path our lives will follow." Ethan swallowed hard, his voice caught in his throat. He had always been a drifter, moving from one place to another, never letting roots grow too deep. He had been alone for so long that the thought of belonging, of having someone stand beside him in trust and partnership, both thrilled and frightened him. But when he looked at Ayoka, at the quiet strength in her eyes, he knew in his heart that this was where he was meant to be. I will, he said finally, his voice low but certain. I will walk with you. Ayoka's smile deepened, a small, joyful curve that reached her eyes. She extended her hand and Ethan took it gently, feeling the warmth of her skin, the firmness of her grip. In that simple gesture, he felt a bond forming, stronger than anything he had known in years of riding alone through deserts, mountains, and valleys. Nahala stepped back, her face calm but her eyes bright with pride. Then it is done, she said. You are no longer a stranger in our land. You are a part of this people now, and together, your lives will be woven into ours. The camp gathered around, some curious, some cautious, but all respectful. The elders nodded to Ethan, acknowledging the courage and honesty he had shown. Children peered at him with interest, and the women gave him quiet smiles. It was a moment of recognition, a public acknowledgement that he had earned a place among them. Later, under the open sky, the ceremony was simple but meaningful. The lodges were decorated with woven blankets and patterns of beads. A fire burned at the center of the gathering, casting flickering light on every face. Nahala stood beside her daughter, who wore a small necklace of polished stones, a symbol of her transition into this new chapter of life. Ethan stood before them, the weight of the moment pressing gently on his shoulders. He did not speak much, for words felt inadequate. Instead, he let his actions show his intentions. He knelt briefly before Ayoka, bowing his head with respect, and she placed her hand over his. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the significance of acceptance, trust, and unity. The people of the camp watched silently, feeling the sincerity in the moment. The wind carried soft whispers of approval through the trees. Some of the older men spoke in low tones, explaining to the younger ones that the man who had saved a life now shared a bond of honor, a bond that would be honored through all seasons to come. Ethan felt a warmth spreading through him, a quiet peace that he had never known. The loneliness he had carried for so many years, the sense of always moving, never settling, began to lift. He realized that this was more than he had ever expected from life. Not only had he found someone he could trust, someone who respected and understood him, but he had also found a home among people who had once seemed distant and unwelcoming. As the ceremony ended, Nahala gave her blessing in her own language, words that Ethan could not fully understand but whose meaning he felt deeply. She smiled at him, a smile filled with approval and quiet joy. Ayoka leaned close, her hand still in his, and whispered, "We will walk together, Ethan. Always." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words in his bones. "Always," he repeated, the sound of it firm, certain, and full of hope. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan settled into the rhythms of life in the camp. He learned more about the land, the ways of the people, and the small traditions that made each day meaningful. He and Ayoka spent time together, not just in ceremony but in simple tasks, gathering firewood, tending to the animals, helping the children with small lessons about the world. Each day their trust grew, and with it, a quiet affection blossomed that neither had to speak aloud to understand. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Ethan stood at the edge of the camp looking at the horizon. His horse grazed nearby, and Ayoka approached him silently. She placed her hand gently on his arm. "You came here thinking to ride alone," she said softly, "and yet you stayed. You gave yourself to a path you did not know, and it led you here." Ethan smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I never thought I would belong anywhere," he admitted. "But now I see that sometimes life has a way of guiding a man where he needs to be, even if he doesn't realize it at first." Ayoka nodded, her eyes reflecting the light of the rising sun. "And sometimes," she said, "the road brings us more than we expect. Love, family, home, all things we cannot take for granted." Ethan turned to her, feeling the weight of the words and the truth in them. "I promise I will honor this," he said. "Not because it was offered, but because it is right. Because you are right. I will stand with you and with your people for as long as I live." Ayoka's smile widened and she leaned in slightly, their hands still joined. "Then we begin together," she said simply. And so a new chapter began. Ethan, the cowboy who had once wandered alone through canyons and plains, now walked a path with Ayoka at his side. Together they faced the days with courage and respect, learning from each other, growing stronger as partners. The bond that began in a small act of kindness had blossomed into a life shared, a family formed and a home built, not just from shelter, but from trust, love, and honor. The sun rose higher, casting golden light over the camp. Children laughed in the distance, elders moved with quiet pride, and the wind carried the soft scent of the forest through the air. Ethan stood beside Ahyoka, feeling the warmth of her hand and the strength of her presence. For the first time in years, he felt the deep contentment of belonging, not just to a place but to people to love, and to a life that had opened before him through a single act of compassion. As the day began, Ethan looked toward the horizon, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with Ahyoka by his side. The canyon, the trail, the wild land he had known for so long were still part of him, but now they were part of something greater, a shared life, a family, and a future built together, step by step, heart by heart.